now have the pleasure to introduce Jasmine Greenemeyer, Vice President and Head of Global Strategic Partnerships at EMD Serono. Jasmine leads the global initiatives Embracing Carers and Healthy Women, Healthy Economies for EMD Serono, the healthcare business of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. She oversees global unpaid caregiver and women's health partnerships with the aim to improve their physical, emotional, and financial health outcomes by advocating for systemic support no matter their stage in life. Prior to joining EMD Serono, Jasmine worked at the Colorectal Cancer Alliance for 8 years and has also worked with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the US and the US Department of Education, as well as the National Institute for Health. When I knew that the World Carers Conversation would be addressing economic security and carers today, I knew that I wanted Jasmine to head off that part of our conversation. Her leadership in this field and investment in family caregivers demonstrate a genuine commitment that make her a special person to have on the side of carers and family caregivers worldwide. Thank you, Jasmine, for sharing a few remarks now to highlight why economic security is a priority in caregiving and how it shows up in the work that you lead at EMD Serono.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for that generous introduction. And thank you to our participants for joining the final section of our World Carers Conversation, this particular section on advancing economic security. And as Lauren alluded to, I'm with EMD Serono. We're the healthcare business of Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany, and we're very proud sponsors of this virtual conference. But moreover, I would step back to say we view ourselves as partners in driving tangible solutions, particularly with multilateral stakeholders that include country-specific governments, leading researchers, and also with very well and highly regarded nonprofit organizations, many of which we're able to work with will be a part of this section coming up. And as Lauren alluded to, we do convene 2 global initiatives, Embracing Carers and Healthy Women, Healthy Economies. And there's obvious synergy between those 2 initiatives. Specifically, we're looking at the physical, emotional, and financial health of both family caregivers, a particular emphasis on unpaid or informal carers, and then a special emphasis on women. And one concrete example of our commitment to advocating for the overall health and economic stability of family caregivers showcased in our Embracing Carers 2021 Global Care Wellbeing Index that surveyed over 9,000 carers across 12 countries and 4 continents. And the results affirmed that no carers are alike in circumstances such as age, gender, and disease type that they care for can present each person with unique challenges. And I think it's interesting to note that there were some aggregate results. For example, we saw with female carers that they were more likely to want or to report on the emotional impacts and to state a desire for more mental and social support. We saw young carers hungry for more guidance, more training, more tools, and peer connections. And middle-aged carers were more likely to be parents or sandwich carers, caring for both children and older parents, were more likely to express interest in financial support. Older carers won't surprise many that they express difficulty in handling some of the technology, but that became very significant, obviously, during the pandemic. But one surprise to us was the mental health strain was expressed deeper for carers helping people with cancer. But there was also some interesting country variation, which may be of interest to some of you on this, as it relates to the financial strain for caregivers. For example, we saw that in Spain, China, and the United Kingdom, caregivers were more likely to express negative impacts on their career, while South Asian or Indian and American carers were least likely to say that. And when we looked at, we asked what could minimize the financial burden for caregivers, overwhelmingly 94% alluded to the fact if there were more financial tools to support them from national governments, that could help them provide care. And alluding to, an easy to find hub or resource, right? Instead of all the disparate things that's very overwhelming to navigate. 2/3 also expressed from their employers that they were not being supported in ways that were helpful to them as carers. And actually overwhelmingly, 95% of global carers said employers should provide additional flexibility policies and support for carers. So in regards to these findings, in consultation with our Embracing Carers partners, 2 of which you'll hear from later in this section, Carers UK and Carers Worldwide, we concluded our report with comprehensive recommendations. And I'm just going to highlight a few. It's a no-brainer to encourage governments to address and support the direct and indirect cost of caregiving. And for the US in particular, more access to affordable respite programs, but also encouraging workplaces to have both caregiver-friendly cultures, but also formal policies to support family caregivers across the lifespan. And the last thing I'll say about this section as we start to move into this, just while I have the floor, is in conjunction with our Embracing Carers partners, this year we're wanting to focus more on the mental health supports of caregivers because we saw coming out of the pandemic that overwhelmingly caregivers across all the different demographics are expressing more burnout emotionally, physically, but also financially. And that'll be forthcoming in a Health Not Hugs global activation campaign. So thank you again for joining this section and all that you do to either support your loved one, your family member, or what you're doing to find or give support to other caregivers, or if you're leading local, national, or international efforts on this topic. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it back to Lauren to hear directly from 2 family carers, one from Ghana and one from Japan. So Lauren, back to you.
Thank you, Jasmine. And we'll see you again later this evening. Jasmine's going to be part of a panel that we hear from soon. So that's a perfect transition now to go back to our Global Voices of Caregiving stories that we have to share today. And as Jasmine just mentioned, we have 2 different stories. We're going to hear them back to back. The first is from Akosua, who's going to tell you about her own caregiving experience, but also some of the caregiving dynamics that she has observed in Ghana, where she lives. And then after that, we'll hear from Marisa in Japan, a young carer who shared the public supports that help her and also additional resources that she thinks would be helpful to caregivers like herself.
My name is Dr. Akosua Agyemang, a senior lecturer of the Department of Social Work and Center for Aging Studies, University of Ghana, Legon. I'm resident in Accra, Ghana, in West Africa. As a long-distance caregiver, I took care of my older mother till she passed many years ago. It was her wish at the time that I took care of her sister, who is now 80 years. The distance between us at the time made caregiving difficult for me because I used to travel long hours by bus to pay her visits and to send her medications every month. In accordance with tradition and the wishes of my dead mother, I adopted my auntie who has no child of her own, one older person who lives nearby to care for every day for the past 10 years. I engage in several activities as depicted in these photos every single day. The woman lives with me in the city because she has no caregiver. The man lives in an uncompleted house nearby, but will not allow anyone to feed or give him his medications I procure for him apart from myself. I therefore help in all activities of daily living and also take him to the hospital every week. He is 85 years and is demented somehow, whilst my auntie is also 80 and is also very ill. Taking care of these two older persons is very much conflicting with my job, running my own home, and stressing me up a lot and draining my income as well. I would have loved that if the state or the government has older people's homes, some of these people without caregivers could be sent there for the state to take care of them, so that some of these burdens could be, taken off our shoulders.
My mother has attention deficit disorder. We received her disability certificate 4 years ago, so now my family gets support from the government. I have a counselor who I can talk about and concerns or programs. I attend meetings with other families in similar situations where we talk about and taking care of their families. I am especially grateful for the financial support. Children should have the right to learn and play. There are still many caregivers in the classroom. I would like the classroom teacher who are closest to the children to notice the children in their care. To do this, we need to create a system or teacher training that collaborated with counselor and school nurses, etc. A society where disability can be considered as individuality, a society that understands both disability and caregivers. I would say with confidence that I have experience as a caretaker or caregiver, which I would like to express in my recommendation.
Thank you, Akosua and Risa, for sharing your stories. The next session, Wellbeing for Working Carers Across the Globe, comes from Dr. Alison Williams at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. Dr. Williams is a professor in the School of Earth, Environment, and Society at McMaster University. She is trained as a health geographer in quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods research, engaging in social justice research to inform policy and program change. Dr. Williams is the primary investigator for the body of research that led to the development of the Canadian Standard for Carer-Inclusive Workplaces and joins us today to discuss how this work has impacted a global conversation and effort to consider what an international workplace standard for carer-inclusive workplaces looks like. Welcome, Dr. Williams, and please take it away.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for a wonderful conference today. It's been very inspiring to hear so many different voices across the globe. So hats off to the National Alliance for Caregiving for putting this on today. I also wanted to thank the secretary to the working group number 3, which is named Jean Bank. She was my partner in crime here in creating the international standard for carer-inclusive organizations. And I'd also like to mention McMaster University, who was a partner in a larger partnership grant made up of more than 30 different partners across the globe, as well as close to 20 academics that are really working to mobilize the idea of a carer-friendly workplace in order to support unpaid carers in the labor market. Next slide, please. So here we have a copy of the standard, which is the focus of our conversation today. On the right, aging societies, General Requirement and Guidelines for Care Inclusive Organizations. This was published in December of 2021, and it took approximately 3 years to realize. And the focus of the standard is really to support organizations, and specifically workplaces, employers, to support unpaid carers at work. And the focus is really those unpaid carers who are providing adult care, whether it be to adults with cognitive, sensory, physical, or invisible disabilities, as well as adults with chronic or episodic conditions, as well as older dependents. And the standard is also specific to those unpaid carers who are providing long-term child care, for example, to children with chronic illness or permanent cognitive, sensory, or physical disability or injury. And finally, this particular standard is really applicable to any organization, irrespective of the sector, the industry, the size, or the community setting, whether it be urban, rural, or remote. So it really is applicable to any workplace, whether it be a small mom and pop shop, for example, or a large multinational organization. And the importance of the idea of standardization for unpaid care workers is really recognizing that this is the first step in compliance with respect to either government or employers being legislated to support unpaid carers at work. So in this case, the international standard is voluntary, as are most standards. So we do have a care inclusive standard for Canada, which is again voluntary, but it eventually may be legislated by government or mandated by industry or trade unions, and consequently provides an opportunity, provides a road, a path, a trajectory for supporting unpaid carers in the workforce. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight the work of the International Standards Organization. So McMaster University, in partnership with the International Standards Organization and with the support of the Canadian Standards Association, worked quite hard to create this standard. And the ISO kindly provided some marketing tools when the actual standard was published in December of 2021. And this is one of the tools that was created in addition to a short video. And what it basically does is it argues for the importance of the standard, given that the current estimate of those who were dependent upon care is close to 350 million people globally, which suggests that obviously caregiving is becoming more and more important, particularly given the demographics of the globe, which suggests that we're aging as a society. And in most developed world contexts or contexts specific to the global north, we are living longer. And consequently, care needs will be on the rise. And this document, the standard, then provides guidance for employers and various organizations to support these unpaid care workers. Next slide, please. So those of you who may not be familiar with the idea of standardization or the process of creating an international standard, it's very much like a recipe that Emma was speaking about a few sessions ago, and it really follows a very strict protocol. The first step is to create a technical committee, and in our case, we created one that included 25 participating countries as well as 16 observers. Our secretariat is the British Standards Institute, and our chair is Brita Berg with the American Association of Retired Persons. And the Technical Committee 314 includes not only the Career Inclusive standard, but also 2 other standards, including dementia-friendly communities, as well as age-inclusive workplaces and career-inclusive organizations, which is finally ours. And we have 4 new projects as well that we're working on as a technical committee, including Wellbeing in Communities, home healthcare products and services, as well as age-inclusive digital economy, and a multi-generational community standard. So the process, again, is quite regimented. And for those of you who are interested, certainly you're more than welcome to check our site, and the address is provided there. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the process. I just wanted to share with you that the Secretariat of our particular standard, the Career Inclusive Organizations, is Canada, given that we had created, again, McMaster University in partnership with the Canadian Standards Association, created the Canadian standard, which operated as the template for this international standard. Our voting members included, and here they are highlighted in the map in blue, Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Australia, Finland, Norway, Uganda, South Korea, China, Singapore, and Germany. And you can see it's quite a wide range of both developing economies and cultural regions across the globe. We also had observers from France, Japan, and Sweden, and also comments from Thailand. And there were also liaisons with the European Trade Union Confederation, as well as Eurocarers. Next slide, please. And I was referring to the Canadian SEED document earlier as far as the template for the international standard. And here we have a picture of both the standard on the left, as well as the implementation guide or the handbook on the right. And these 2 documents are free of charge, are complimentary on the Canadian Standards Association website. Again, McMaster University is in partnership with the Canadian Standards Association in providing these documents as complimentary through to 2025. And the process that this Canadian Standards Association followed was, again, similar to the ISO standard, very regimented, with very specific protocols around the number of, for example, nonprofits, the number of government members, the number of academic members, the number of individuals who are noted to be caregivers, and so on and so forth. So again, there's a very strict protocol around representation on these various committees and in the creation of these standards. And I'm happy to say that we were able to secure funding for a 7-year program of research that's really working to mobilize the Canadian standard and its implementation guide across Canada. And so in totality, we have 12 projects now. We're about midway through our 7-year program of research, which is really, again, looking at not only the barriers to mobilization, but the facilitators to mobilization, as well as looking at a number of projects specific to looking at the standard as an intervention and examining the cultural competency of the standard and guide with immigrant and refugees, as well as First Nations, Indigenous folks. So our work is quite broad. Some of our newer projects are looking specifically at the cultural competency for 2S LGBTQ+ individuals. And we have a new project that looks specifically at the Canadian the CCC program, which is the Canadian Compassionate Communities program that is led out of our Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association here in Canada. So again, the research program is evolving over time, and the work is really trying to build the evidence for supporting unpaid carers at work. Next slide, please. So again, just very briefly around process, the timeline for the development of the standard took approximately 3 years, and these were the 6 stages. First, we had a proposal stage where, again, the project needed to be vetted and a working group established. Then we had the preparatory stage where we had a kickoff meeting and consultation around scope and content. Then we had a committee stage, an inquiry stage, an approval stage, and then finally the publication stage. And funny enough, the inquiry stage around the public review was quite seamless, meaning we had very few comments or concerns. And the longest stage was actually the publication stage with respect to editing and revising. Next slide, please. And here is what we call the meat and potatoes, or the real focus of the standard, as far as what it proposes organizations and specifically employers do in order to support unpaid carers within their organization. So starting at the top, we have setting the stage. And this is where an organization is to define the scope, the various definitions, and the guiding principles of the creation of what they call, or what we call, and hopefully they will eventually call, a carer-friendly workplace or a carer-friendly organization. Secondly, we have the development of the program where, again, we have a committee struck that is really from ground up, which includes care workers. And here we have a commitment and a focus on worker participation. We also have data collected on existing supports. So there's an environmental scan, as well as the identification of gaps. Again, given the importance of having worker participation on the committee, those gaps can be clearly identified. And then finally, from that gap analysis, objectives are set as our targets. And so this is sort of the idea stage. And then the implementation comes next in yellow, and this is really where the gap identification is realized through intervention. And it could include, for example, education around awareness and training specific to supervisors and managers, for example, being cognizant of the importance of supporting care workers. It could also be about communication. So we've identified today that many carers don't identify within the workplace, or don't identify in society more generally. So it's about allowing care workers to identify as carers and then being able to communicate that comfortably without stigma. And then building a carer culture, which means it being okay to identify as a carer and to making it be okay to discuss caregiving, similar to the way most of us discuss our childcare issues as parents in the workplace. And then finally, determining and building and implementing best practice. So again, this implementation stage, similar to the first 2 stages, really allows the committee to tailor the program to the size, the sector, as well as the demographic profile of the individual organization or employer. And then finally, we move to monitoring and measuring. And this is a really critical piece because the program is dynamic. It doesn't just get made and left alone. It's a very dynamic process that allows us to improve over time. And the monitoring and measuring allows us to gain feedback around the satisfaction from workers with respect to the program, as well as, again, the awareness and training specific to the supervisors and managers. So the monitoring and measuring feeds into review and improvement, where, again, continual improvement takes place and moves back to again, redefining the scope, as well as potentially tweaking definitions and guiding principles and so on and so forth. And we know that the workplace is a dynamic place. You know, we know that equity, inclusion, and diversity issues are inclusive of care issues. And consequently, given the dynamic nature of this moving needle, we too have to be cognizant of the fact that the care-friendly workplace is in constant change. And we have to be on our toes to ensure that the program is in fact meeting the needs of the care workers within the organization. Next slide, please. So we just reviewed the meat and potatoes of the standard. We have a couple of annexes that we've added to the international standard. One is a sex and gender-based lens, and the importance of incorporating a sex and gender lens, given that, again, data or information related to working carers and carer-inclusive organizations is needed to make informed choices around programs. We know, for example, that different sectors, different industries may in fact be dominated by a particular sex or gender. For example, the construction industry employs predominantly male workers. We also know that, again, the demographic profile of a particular organization may change over time. So as more and more women enter the construction industry, for example, the demographic profile changes, and consequently, issues specific to care-friendly workplaces become increasingly important, given that we know that the majority of unpaid care workers are still, in fact, female. We also know that for the most part, women and marginalized groups often make up the majority of the secondary labor market, which consists mainly of workers in unskilled jobs that are low paying, have few benefits and opportunities for advancement, and are typified by high turnover rates. And consequently, a sex and gender lens can help meet a more equitable approach to, again, these often disenfranchised workers in order to ensure that they stay employed. And this is really what the standard is all about, is ensuring that unpaid care workers can, in fact, maintain both their unpaid caregiving role as well as their paid role within the labor market. And it's an attempt to minimize unpaid carers leaving the labor market, because once they leave the labor market, it's very difficult to get back into it. They often not only lose financial security, but they often lose their social network and their sense of purpose, sense of meaning, sense of belonging, and sense of purpose. So again, it's really critical for us to think about ways in which we can maintain these unpaid carers within the labor market. And secondly, our Annex B is really a checklist which provides an organization to really conduct that environmental scan and that gap analysis. And what it is basically an assessment of a number of different variables, either being met, not met, or partially met. And we have close to 30 different variables that we've listed for organizations to use in, again, creating their care-friendly workplace. Next slide, please. So again, in order to make this work as internationally relevant as possible, we've taken the time to situate the international standard within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we've identified 5 here, but there's many more that, again, we can specify with respect to where the standard fits. The first one is really looking at gender inequality, which is goal 5, given that, again, as I mentioned, close to 60 to 80% of all unpaid carers are female, depending upon the country context. We've also recognized decent work and economic growth, as well as good health and well-being, no poverty, and sustainable cities and communities. So the importance of contextualizing the standard within the STGs is really to bring forward the relevance of supporting unpaid carers at work. As I mentioned, it's really important for economic security, and it's also important for the livelihood of the larger family. And as we know, in many countries, particularly in the global South, extended families and both nuclear and extended families rely on employment extensively. So the STG number 3, good health and well-being, is not just for the caregiver, the unpaid caregiver, but also for the care recipient, the nuclear family, and the extended family. So again, there's many more individuals that are at play here when we're thinking about the implementation of the international standard. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, I wanted to talk about the challenges that we experienced in creating this standard. And certainly, as many of you know, one of the big challenges is not having a universal consensus on terms and definitions. Because we have such a diverse set of terminology, what we did was we created a terminology guide so everyone would be on the same page in this very important work. Secondly, we found that many countries wanted more guidance around flexibility and implementation of the standard, particularly suggesting that a phased approach might be beneficial rather than, again, sort of, cutting off a big piece through the creation of a care-friendly workplace standard as was proposed in that cyclical diagram. Thirdly, there was a lot of traditional gender norms in many of our member countries involved in the creation of the standard. So we had numerous different conversations about sex and gender and inclusivity. There was also some discussion around how the standard would fit into diverse legal and country-specific programs, given, again, there's great variety, particularly around unionization, as well as government-specific approaches, specific to policy and programming, for example. And then finally, we really thought about the need to reflect on the importance of emphasizing the business case for supporting working carers, looking at the impact of the pandemic and hybrid work, the importance of double duty carers who are not only providing paid healthcare services, but also unpaid care work. And then the importance of recognizing an intersectionality approach with disabled carers, for example. And then our final slides are really just examples of the various tools. The next slide, for example, shows us the terminology related to caregiving. And our next slide shows, again, the definitions that we worked on as we tried to be as inclusive as possible in order to incorporate as many countries as possible. The next slide suggests, or rather reviews our funders. So in Canada, we have 3 tri-council agencies, and we're very fortunate to have 2 of them supporting our work, both SSHRC and CIHR. And then finally, I have my website listed, and I encourage you to come visit us. We do have a tab specifically around tools and curriculum, which outlines a good 36 different tools for organizations and employers to use to become carer friendly. And again, certainly please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me if you have any further questions or would like to chat about either the ISO standard or any of the work outlined on our website and our larger research program specific to care-friendly workplaces. And then we'll just leave on the final slide, which shows a few of the tools on our Tools and Curriculum tab. And the final slide. There we go. That's the tools. Thank you. And look forward to your questions and your comments.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. And that website has a lot of your publications and resources related to what you talked about today. So I've just dropped the link that you shared an image of into the chat box. That's a great place to get more information. At this time, you know, you've really put us in a great position, Dr. Williams, to take on the next session. And as we transition there, folks who have some questions or comments can continue to share those in the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and bring on our next panel, and they're going to be talking about this same theme and the same topic in a little bit of a different way. Our next session is led by Carers UK, and it's called Business Champions, Transforming the Workplace for Carers. Let me now introduce and welcome this session's moderator, Helen Walker, the Chief Executive of Carers UK. Helen joined Carers UK in December of 2018 from the national volunteering charity Time Bank, where she was chief executive for 10 years. Since joining Carers UK, she has focused on ensuring the financial stability and growth of the charity in order to launch its ambitious new strategy, Vision 2025. Helen has been appointed to represent carers on the National Health Service Assembly, as well as the National Institute for Health Research, School for Social Care Research Advisory Board at the London School of Economics. Previously, Helen was Director of Fundraising at the military charity SAFA and has worked in the voluntary sector for over 25 years. Brought up on the Isle of Man, she studied for a degree and Masters of Philosophy at the London School of Economics. Helen, thank you for being with us, for leading this conversation on how employers are contributing to greater financial well-being of carers and the role Carers UK and Employers for Carers is playing in all of this. So let me please now turn things over to you to introduce the panelists you've brought with you today and kick things off.
Lauren, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today, joining the World Carers conversation with our distinguished panel. This session will provide, I think, an exciting opportunity to explore a range of insights from senior business champions with practical experience of promoting support for carers in their workplace. We'll hear different perspectives on the role of champions from a range of different sectors, including about how these have all played a key role in the development of the Employers for Carers Forum in the UK. As some, but not all of you will be aware, Employers for Carers, EFC, is Carers UK's growing membership forum and service for employers who are seeking to support the carers in their workforce and retain key talent. Managed and supported by the specialist knowledge of the charity that I run, Carers UK, EFC has been driven and informed by business champions from the start. Launched as a membership service in January 2009, EFC now has 245 member organisations, which covers nearly 4 million employees across the private and the non-profit sectors and growing number of global employers. From inception, senior business leaders have been central to EFC's development, including Caroline Waters, formerly at BT Group, who first chaired the forum's leadership group, and Nick Baird in his former role at Centrica PLC, which has been consistently active in developing and demonstrating evidence of the business case for supporting carers, and then the public sector too. It's been inspiring to see how champions in the National Health Service in the UK have been seeking to identify and recognise carers in such a huge and complex organisation, one of the largest employers in the world and the biggest in Europe. So it's great that we're also joined here today by Jane Galloway. And last but very certainly not least, we're delighted to have Jasmine Greenemeyer on the panel from EMD Serono, who I know has already contributed to this event earlier today, and whose organisation is not only leading the way in global carer research through its Embracing Carers initiative, but also as an engaged global employer, including as a member of EFC. So with such a fantastic panel, I'm going to move straight on to business. To help kick off our panel discussion, I'm going to invite each panellist to say a few words about why transforming the workplace for carers is so important to them and their own experience of championing working carers. After this, I'm going to chair a little discussion with the speakers to follow up on some key issues that they've raised. And then at the end of the session, I'm going to try to pull some conclusions together from the panel about some of the key things that make a difference. So first, if I may, Caroline, go to you. Caroline is the Deputy Chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission here in the UK and is former Director of People and Policy at the BT Group and was the first ever Chair of our Employers for Carer Forum. So Caroline, the floor is yours.
Follow that. Thank you very much, Helen. Well, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak on an issue that is so pertinent to sustaining healthy families, societies and economies. Caring is a demographic fact and one that affects millions of families around the globe, and it's ever present. Whatever is going on in the world, people grow old, have disabled relatives, fall down, break a hip, and in a potentially life-changing moment, their loved ones become a carer. As you heard, I was BT's Director of Policy, charged with creating a very engaged and inclusive workforce for BT. And for those of you who don't know BT, they're the national telecoms provider for the UK. And at the time, we're talking about 97, 98, I had the privilege of being one of around 235,000 colleagues. We were a microcosm of society, as you can imagine, and subject to the ever-changing world around us. And that meant that we had to adapt if we were going to survive and thrive. One of the things I loved most about BT was their determination to anticipate and understand what the future nature of work and life in general would look like. And every year my team and I would look at what was on the demographic, legislative, commercial, economic, environmental horizon. In 1997, one of the many interesting things that we were able to predict was that at precisely the time the global economy would need millions more people in work, our largely ageing societies and the impact of medical advances would create an exponential increase in the need for care. The UK had next to no infrastructure for this volume of care, so the resource inevitably had to come from families, friends or neighbours, most of whom also worked. In fact, our research told us we could see as many as 3 out of every 5 people in the UK caring at some stage in their lives. All this in a context where organisations are constantly striving for innovation, increased productivity, and the cost effectiveness that transforms and enhances their performance, while also adjusting to the new commercial reality of 24/7 by 365 days a year working. But I mean, who delivers all of that? It's our people. And the question for us was, how did we achieve that for our whole workforce in an ever more complex and demanding world? How could we help our people work, parent, care, and stay well? And what we did know was that happy and valued people equaled better performance. Now, statistically, we knew that we had literally thousands of carers in our organisation, around 15% of the workforce, probably. We didn't, and if we didn't get the employee experience right for them, we would lose all of the skills, the unique perspective, talents and insights that they brought us. Neither would we have the insight into what our quite likely millions of customers who were also carers would need from our business. So for us, making sure that carers were supported to remain in or return to employment wasn't just the right business sense that would deliver demonstrable business benefits. We also knew that we couldn't do it alone. Caring for someone you love will always, and quite rightly, come before job and career. That's why we knew it was very important that the business case for supporting carers was recognised, not only by employers, but by governments too. It needed to shape their thinking around wider public services and infrastructure. The bottom line was that if there were no services for the cared for, the carer would have no choice but to drop out of the labour market. But the thing we didn't expect was that carers didn't recognise themselves as carers. They were simply looking after family or friends. It's just something you do, right? They didn't think of it as a function that you're going to have to classify with a label. We realised caring was an almost invisible thing. It was hiding in plain sight in our organisations. And so sharing the business case became really crucial. BT were already pioneers in building inclusive workforces, places, solutions. We quickly realised that supporting carers in our workforce, it wasn't difficult, expensive or disruptive, but it was a business imperative. A small change in working hours, offering truly flexible working arrangements that change seamlessly as the demands on the carer change, because we realised caring is not a static thing. It really does change. And therefore we had to trust people to do their job their way while caring. And that made all the difference to the carers and to the business. We used that to build a business case that demonstrated how that kind of flexibility and knowing the demographics of your workforce helped us attract and retain essential skills, increase productivity, cut costs, and release the real potential of those thousands of carers that were working for us. We used that business case and the personal stories of hundreds of BT carers who joined the carers network we set up to engage senior leaders at BT and beyond. And it's a truism, isn't it? True the whole world round, that what the boss does gets copied. And having senior leaders who really understood the issues, talking about how supporting carers was not only a living demonstration of our values, but sent all their business metrics in the right direction, drove awareness and consistency right across the business. The final breakthrough came when some of those senior managers realised that they themselves were carers and they shared their personal stories. In that moment began the end of that subtle bigotry of low expectation that carers had experienced. Now there was evidence that you could care and have a career, not just a nice little job somewhere. So it's possible. We as employers can create an inclusive, supportive environment for carers while improving our business. It's doing good by doing business, and that's the way it should be. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much. I really like that, what the boss does gets copied. I'm next going to invite Nick Baird, who is the chair of Carers UK, so in essence my boss, the former UK ambassador to Turkey and business leader, specifically I think in this case group corporate affairs director for Centrica. So Nick, I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about your experience there.
Thanks very much, Helen. And I'm absolutely delighted to talk about my experience of how Centrica, which is an energy and services company with about 20,000 employees, best known for owning British Gas, has supported unpaid carers in our workforce to manage the challenges that Caroline described so well of juggling work and responsibilities of caring for a loved one. I mean, I had both a management role in the sense that I led our company's relationship with Carers UK during the 3 years that it was our main charity partner. But also I have the experience of being a carer myself, firstly for an elderly widowed father, and then secondly for a disabled adult sister, and therefore directly experiencing myself the importance of a carer-friendly environment for employees. I mean, our relationship with Carers UK goes back well beyond the last 3 years when I was in charge of it, and we it kind of enabled us to develop a really good sense over time of how best to help carers in the workplace. And so we do have good policies and practice, like paid carers leave on top of annual leave, carers passports to help ensure managers understand carers' rights when they move from one job to another, and a carers network to address the insight that we got so very strongly that carers tended to think that they were alone in dealing with their concerns, and how much it helped to be able to talk to others. But the three things I wanted to concentrate on in particular, firstly, data and how it has helped us as a business. So Caroline said a little bit about what BT did, and again, we spent a lot of time really gathering the data of around the economic impact on our company, and the fact that we were able to demonstrate both to ourselves but to other businesses and indeed to government that not only was it not a cost to have good policies for carers, it was a net economic benefit. I think has been extremely powerful in helping us, both recruit more and more businesses and employers into employers for carers and into a process for developing carer-friendly workplaces themselves, but also in terms of policy change with government. And we were able to demonstrate this largely through the much reduced recruitment costs. We had less unplanned absences. We had measurable improvements in productivity from carers who were treated well and were prepared to put in that extra, go the extra mile because of the benefit that they were given. The second thing I wanted to kind of stress was culture. I mean, each of those individual policies that I've described were, hugely important and valuable in themselves. But what they also did was drive a culture in which managers and colleagues understood the pressures of being a carer, and in often quite difficult to detect ways, supported their team members who had caring responsibilities. So to give you myself as an example, so in the last couple of years of my father's life, he was on his own, living on his own. I was his carer and his closest relative. And, he would ring me up quite regularly on my phone. And, I obviously wouldn't know whether it was an important call or not an important call. I was a member of our company's executive committee, and our CEO, who was very deeply committed to this relationship. He and I would have just a little sign that we would have between us when he knew that I needed to step out of the room to take a phone call. And it just made it so much easier for me that he was entirely tolerant of that. And then on what turned out to be the last day of my father's life, I got that call that we all kind of dread from the hospital saying, you better come fairly soon because he's going to, he's not got long. And I know, because I know the sort of person I am, that if I'd been in a difficult environment, I probably would have said to myself, look, he'll be fine till the evening. I'll stay, and I'll stay till the end of working hours and then go. But because it was an environment in which I knew not only would that be entirely accepted, it would be shocking not to go. So I did, and was able to have that kind of final conversation that's so important in a way of passing at that time. So I think culture is critically important. And then thirdly, technology. So working with businesses, and I think this is an area which is underdeveloped so far, has huge potential going forward. Working with businesses and other organizations to use technology to support carers is so important. We're running a project at the moment with Carers UK, funded by the government, a project called Tribe, where we're working with a business who has software which can identify black spots where there's carer support around the country, which then gives us the opportunity to focus on those particular areas to try and strengthen it. We as a company worked with Carers UK and using a technology that we had developed to monitor energy use through your telephone, and we developed it in a way that it could be used so that you could carefully and unobtrusively check that you're the person you're caring for who lived somewhere else, the rhythm of their energy use when they got up in the morning by the turning on of the light, when they made themselves a cup of tea was natural, and if it wasn't, it would give you an alarm to kind of let you know. So there are huge opportunities. There are also huge challenges, and as we go forward, I think digitization can go in both directions. Just to give you a completely live example, so 10 minutes before I came on this call, I got an email from my disabled sister telling me that the bank in her town was closing down. The branch was closing down, and we know that's a very common thing at the moment, because people, of course, can do a lot of their financial activity online. Well, it's a big issue for her. She loves going into her local bank. She loves the fact that they know her, and can help her. But obviously, that's going to go. So there are ways and ways in which technology can help, or unintentionally hinder as well. So that's kind of my overall experience. And I just like to just finish by saying the work that carers under Helen's leadership have done in the area of employers for carers is phenomenal, and it's effectively helped to create carer-friendly workplaces for 4 million employees, which is a fantastic achievement.
Thanks very much indeed, Nick. I'm already sensing a bit of a theme here about the importance of leadership in terms of carers in the workplace. I'm next going to go to Jane Galloway. Jane is the head of flexible working at NHS England and NHS Improvement, and has had a varied career in the NHS since 1999, and is now working to influence the inclusion of flexible working practices across England. I imagine quite a challenging couple of years, Jane.
Just a little bit, Helen. Tiny challenge. Thank you. It's lovely to be here this evening, this morning, whatever time it is where you are. Yes, so my name is Jane Galloway, and as Helen has pointed out, I'm the head of flexible working at NHS England and Improvement. NHS, for those of you who don't know, is the National Health Service. So we're the largest employer in Europe, and we're a provider of healthcare services which are free at the point of access, which is something that if you speak to any Brit, they will passionately say is a dear thing in the UK. And I'm lucky enough to have worked in the NHS since '99. My dad worked in the NHS, my mum worked in the NHS, and both my brothers work in the NHS. So if you cut me through, it probably says NHS on the inside. When the pandemic hit in March 2020 in the UK, when we started to get signals that we'd be going into lockdown, I remember the last day in the office, there was some very frenetic activity about what are we going to prioritise? What do we stop doing? What do we ramp up? What do we start doing? And at the time, I was leading a massive team of me. And I had to decide when it came to flexible working, what was the key thing. And I still don't know how I landed on carers, but it suddenly hit me that actually the workforce that we have that keeps the country running in terms of health and social care is going to be impacted themselves. And if we want to keep the NHS running during the pandemic, we have to make sure that our staff are able to work in the best way possible. We have huge challenge in the NHS about retention, and I know that is widespread at the moment, but obviously in order to maintain safe and effective clinical care, we have to make sure we've got certain staffing levels, etc. So if we started losing staff during the pandemic because they were unable to work because of the flexibility they may need, and particularly for carers, then we were going to be in real trouble. I don't have experience of being a carer myself, and this journey, more than anything, has really impacted me personally. Hearing the stories I've heard along the way about the difference that support can make to carers in terms of them actually being able to enter and maintain a place in the workforce is massive. And my learning around that has been huge. I do remember sitting and sobbing in a meeting of the Carers Connect team, just overwhelmed by some of the stories that we were hearing and sharing between us. So it's been a huge learning curve for me. And I think the reason that's important is because you don't understand and you don't think about carers until it happens to you or it's in your sphere of influence all of a sudden. It's so easy to not think about carers because if you're not impacted by it, it just doesn't come to mind necessarily. And so to be reminded of that and to be part of a circle of people who is experiencing that personally as well as working on that was really, really important. So when we went into lockdown and we were all working on ironing boards and in offices and sharing laptops with children and etc., numerous pets walking across screens, all of it still happening. My attention went to how do we support our working carers, and I quickly discovered that Carers UK had this incredible resource, this Employers for Carers membership. I was helped by, we have an internal team called the Commitment to Carers team who look at carers generally in our community and our population, not necessarily with a workforce slant. So that's where I was bringing a different slant. But they were brilliant in helping me and introduced me to Catherine and Madeline, who I am sure are watching somewhere, but as part of Carers UK. And they have been fundamental in helping us to get a membership across the whole of the NHS in England to the Employers for Carers membership. We also at the same time launched and signalled the intention that we wanted people to use the Working Carers Passport in the NHS. So in order to make that happen, we did some work with our team who runs the electronic staff record. So how we book our annual leave, how we get our pay slips, all of that sort of stuff. They helped us to create what is a dreadful term, but it's a technical term. They created a competency where people could self-identify as being a carer. That then triggered a message to their line manager that said, hey, this person has identified as a carer. You now need to have a conversation with them using the Working Carers Passport. And it's simple and it's efficient. And it was an easy way for us to try and encourage people to say, I'm here and I need some support, or at least a conversation about what support I might need in the future. So we put those things in place. The challenge is, at the time, being a team of one, which grew because I made everyone join my team when they said they were going to help me with carers. It was like, right, okay, I'm adopting you. And now I have a slightly bigger team. But the challenge was, it's me trying to influence a workforce of approximately 1.5 million in the NHS. So doing that from a national centre and trying to have local influence during a pandemic when people are challenged clinically, burnout, retention, winter pressures, COVID, and now recovery is massively challenging in terms of getting that on people's priority lists. But we are still battling away, and there are incredible local networks within our NHS organisations, people who have created these networks at grassroots level to support carers. And actually those are growing from what I'm hearing, the stories that are coming out are just incredible about what people do to support and encourage that recognition of the working carers in our workforce. When we started this work, we estimated, thanks to some work that Carers UK did actually, we estimated there was about 1 in 5 of our workforce were probably carers. I'm really proud of the work that my team that I eventually got did to get a question in our NHS National Health Service staff survey. So this is a survey that goes to a massive sample of all the staff who work in the NHS. As I said, there's a workforce of around 1.5 million. And we got, for the first time ever, a question in there, a demographic question about, do you provide care? Are you caring for anyone? And we expected around 1 in 5. It's actually about 1 in 3. So last year, the figure was 32.3% of our workforce who responded to the questionnaire identified as being a carer. And this year, we've just had the results fairly recently, and it's 30.6%. So it's still hovering at around a third. We thought it might have gone up because people will take on responsibilities due to the pandemic, either people needing caring responsibilities or the normal services that would be there for them, the community and the network that had to stop during COVID. People took on more responsibility there, but it's still hovering at 1 in 3 approximately. So it is massive. Our next steps really are to think about how we create local ownership for this. So me doing it as an arm's length body is great, but what we want to do is get down back into grassroots and say, look, do you know who the carers are in your workforce? Have you promoted the use of our electronic staff survey records so that you can get your staff to identify? As Caroline said earlier, it's really hard to get working carers to identify, partly sometimes because people don't know that they're carers. They're simply a neighbour or a daughter or a brother or whatever it might be. They're simply doing what they should and want to and feel that they can do. So they don't recognise that they're carers. And of course, the other thing is the stigma it can create in the workforce as well. If you have a workplace that doesn't have a culture of supporting perhaps flexibility as well as caring responsibilities, if you feel that your career is going to be stymied or you're going to be seen as flaky or unreliable, then of course you're not going to come forward and say, I have caring responsibilities. But I think it's really important, and especially given our role as providing health and care, it's really important that we're able to look after our own staff. The one story that really sticks with me was someone saying that, you know, we're all on these screens and we're lucky enough in NHS E&I that so many of us were able to work remotely. You don't know what's going on behind the door. Someone can arrive in a meeting having just closed the door on an end of life situation. You know, they're providing care, but they're still trying to function at work as well. So actually having those rounded conversations and understanding what's going on for your immediate team, which can then grow like Topsy, so we have a better understanding of our workforce, I think is so important. So we also launched during COVID the health and wellbeing conversations, and one of the prompts within those is to ask directly about people's caring responsibility and needs for flexibility. Thanks, Helen.
Jane, thank you very much. I can't begin to imagine the challenges of caring at home and in the workplace during the COVID and the NHS. So just extraordinary that you've used that as an opportunity to raise the profile of unpaid carers in the workforce. Our final panelist is Jasmine Greener-Meyer, Vice President and Head of Global Strategic Partnerships at EMD. I'm going to say Serono. Is it Serono or Serono?
Yes, got it right, Helen. Serono. Yep.
Among other responsibilities, leads the global initiative Embracing Carers. So Jasmine, over to you.
Well, thank you, Helen. And as you said, it's the global convener for Embracing Carers, where we get to work with the leading international national caregiver organizations. We obviously feel it's very important to walk the talk, right? And promoting and supporting our own employee family caregivers. But I have to start with saying I have to give credit where credit is due. You know, our internal efforts actually arose because of a family caregiver within our company, also because of the buy-in from top leadership, which is the theme as you alluded to earlier, and then a small committed cross-functional group within our company. And I have to say one caregiver in particular, she had the vision for starting our employee resource group, and also the initial vision for a company-wide HR training that was for managers and colleagues on family caregiving. And her name is Emily White. She's a tour de force within France, and she cares for her son who has a genetic disorder. But to be fully transparent, when she easily got buy-in for the employee resource group, and she quickly got buy-in for the HR module, but then she hit some walls. And it took partnering with my team, and I have a colleague, Elizabeth Folan, who's been huge in this, to get the financial resources to develop the training. That became a little bit of a hot potato within the company. And also to help convene this cross-functional group who needed to sign off on this 20-minute learning module for our over 60,000 employees. So from start to finish, this was about a 2-year process. And, you know, while we're very proud of what we do to support caregivers, it didn't happen overnight. It did start with a change agent who encouraged us to actively listen and step up to the plate to support employees who are caregivers. I was asked to briefly, you know, say why this is personally important to me and professionally, and I would just want to allude to it's multifaceted. As Nick alluded to, you know, this is personal for me. I have a sister who's a carer for one of my other sisters, and we're probably no different from other family members or families, excuse me, where my sister's day-to-day care is often undervalued, second guessed, or unevenly emotionally and financially supported. So there's that component. But I would say, even if it wasn't personal to me, earlier in my career, I've worked in the cancer advocacy space, and you'd be hard pressed to meet any patient or survivor who would not acknowledge how important their family caregiver was on their cancer treatment journey. And it was caregivers who were often the very first at the table to demand cures for their loved ones. They're volunteering, they're fundraising, and sometimes they're far more informed than researchers and medical practitioners in the field, right? But it was part of why I came to this company. I thought it was neat and important and attractive that as a patient-directed healthcare company, it was very much part of the DNA to say you can't just do patient-directed work and acknowledge caregivers as individuals and part of the healthcare team. And then that leads us to embracing carers. And the reason I wanted to come back to that, others alluded to the business case, and we had Allison earlier talk about the societal elements. As we convene these initiatives outside the company, we're very much mindful that there's a demographic cliff, again, that Allison alluded to, where we have both aging societies and a low birth replacement. And the other element that we often talk about related to family caregiving is the shortage of well-trained and fairly paid caregivers, right? And there's a convergence of societal factors going on of why it's more important than ever for companies to be taking this issue on, not just internally, but externally, because it's going to be affecting global economies, local economies in many different ways. But I think it was, someone else alluded to the fact of wanting to make sure that family caregivers are thriving in the workplace, but moreover, staying in the workplace. And that's where I go back to, our internal commitment. We look at this is an economic issue for caregivers, their families, but also, the knock-on effects to local, state, and national economies. And I don't have to remind this group, I'm sure, about the economic impact, right, often to the career of family caregivers. So that's why we've really leaned into wanting to support particularly women within our workplace. We have a Women in Leadership employee resource group. We also are mindful about how communities of color are disproportionately impacted by caregiving. They're often doing far more intensive caregiving. So we have employee resource groups there. But moreover, it's looking at workplace practices and workplace culture. And that's where I'm really proud that our HR and benefits team rolled out future ways of working, which they did during the pandemic, but they had started the work before the pandemic because they saw that millennials and Gen Zs are very vocal that they want flexible working arrangements. And it's one of their initial questions when they're looking at starting with a company. And one of the key reasons is why they'll leave a company. And Helen, when you talked about the importance of leadership, I have to come back to say, we were very lucky that our group CEO, she's a physician by training. She has been a champion both externally and within the company for caregivers. And when we launched that HR training that had a series of vignettes and practical tools for managers and colleagues, she sent that training, across as an email, out through her corporate channels and highlighted it across all her various corporate channels. And that was huge. And also highlighting different employee stories, right? But, it came from the top. But it was a combination of grassroots and grass tops, as they say. And last thing I'll just allude to, in all of this and having a very comprehensive culture and systemic policy and procedures is the importance of our employee assistance program, because it has counseling for employees and their family members. And in recent years, we've seen a huge uptick in that, but particularly as it relates to family caregivers and mental health, but even just having access for a professional to be able to talk to their immediate family members. The last thing I'll say, just as a company, when we think about our internal efforts and walking the talk, we do a combination of advocating for, paid family medical leave. And I think that'll resonate particularly with my US friends because, we're one of the very last developed markets to have comprehensive paid family medical leaves. Only about 20% of employees currently have that. We also advocate for mental health services for family caregivers. And we're very loud on flexible working arrangements and how important that is. Because as someone else said, you're going to have caregiving across the lifespan. So with that, Helen, I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. And it's really interesting that leadership piece comes up again. I just talked very, very briefly about my own experience at Carers UK, where we find, even though our charity, the whole purpose is about caring, that we have people who who won't talk about their caring within the workplace and feel uncomfortable in doing so, even though we have 10 days paid care leave. And in fact, a few weeks ago, when my mum was having an operation, she lives up in Scotland, so it's a sort of 7-hour drive. It was really important to me to tell people that I was taking a couple of days care leave in order to go and look after her, that I wasn't just disappearing up to Scotland on holiday. So that, to make sure that I just put that out in my weekly email so that people knew that it was okay to do that, and that I, even though it's a really, relatively small surgery, and it's not an ongoing caring relationship, it's something that we just need to get out there and not be afraid of talking about as leaders in whatever sector we're in. I think it's really important. Caroline, I'm going to come back to you. Just to ask, I'm going to go around to everyone to ask a sort of a follow-up question, if you like. I'm very conscious of time. We've got about 20 minutes, I think, left. What did you find the biggest barrier to championing awareness and support of carers when you first started doing this at BT?
I think there were two things really, and we've kind of mentioned both of them. The first was, and I can remember working with Madeline Starr and Catherine Wilson at the time. We set up this event for BT carers, and it was one of several that we were holding on the day for different groups, and only one person came to the carers event, and we knew we had thousands of them. We were simply mystified, and we were repeating, so there was one session in the morning, then we were repeating it in the afternoon, and we said to this person, where's everybody else, kind of thing. They said, well, I had to think about whether I was a carer, and it's this whole thing about nobody gives themselves that label, so we kind of had to go out and really explain, but there was a label for this thing that you just naturally do for your family or a friend or a neighbour. And then that changed. So that we resolved that issue by really talking about it and really raising awareness and working with Carers UK to really make sure we were using consistent language and really getting people to identify with us. The second one, and this was really true about the senior team, who, to get that consistency across the organisation, we really needed to get involved, was this fear that we were crossing the line between something that was very personal and something that we were bringing into the workplace. And, who wants to sit down with a new manager and talk about their mother's incontinence? And it felt like a real issue. So we did two things. One, we said, right, we had already introduced flexible working and it was already reason neutral. So we really, really made it clear that the only decision a line manager has to make about giving somebody flexible working is it operationally viable? You don't need to know why the person needs it unless that's a conversation they want to have with you. So we took that awkwardness out of the conversation. And that was also why we invented the carers passport. We already had a mental ill health and a maternity passport. So we just took all of that great learning and put it into a carers passport as well, to make sure that there was that mobility, that there was an easy way to have a conversation about what a carer needed. And once we did those things, so we established this is a real thing, and we got people over that hitch of it is a real thing, but I don't want to talk about it. And that's when we made the breakthrough.
Thanks, Caroline. Nick, just coming to you in terms of Centricare. I mean, so Caroline was talking about at the very beginning there at BT, but why do you think Centrica has been so successful in keeping a spotlight on carers in the workplace?
So I think I genuinely think it does go back, principally to the culture point. I think once you have, deeply established a culture in a workplace, it just naturally continues, and it has been. It's been a relationship that's developed over many years, but it's now, I would say, fully embedded. And it's fully embedded in a way which provides surprising additional benefits. So I don't think we ever set out as a company particularly to be the company which was really knowledgeable about supplying gas and electricity to carers, but it happened, and it happened because our customer service agents in our call centres, because of the culture in their workplace, will kind of alert to the sorts of signals that a customer might give, which would indicate that they were a carer. And as soon as that happened, then we had a whole range of other things that we could advise in terms of support. So when a culture is embedded, I think it produces very supportive and very strong results. And I genuinely think that's not going to go away. I mean, too many people are completely involved in it for that to happen. And it passed very naturally between CEOs. Our new CEO Chris is exactly the same. He knows and values very strongly what we do for carers.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nick. Jane, I'll come to you next. I mean, it's probably on the customer point there that Nick makes, probably guaranteed place that every carer will walk through the door with the person that they care for is an NHS establishment. So by embedding it in the NHS, it by definition is helping carers right across the UK. But the question I wanted to come to you about really was about the size of your workforce. Do you think that there's it's a massive number of people. Is there a particular challenge, you think, in raising awareness in an organisation of this scale?
There is, for sure, and especially when it falls on what feels like a small group of people to start with. But what I have tried to do, and what I've certainly done with flexible working, is I try and talk about it all the blooming time. I'm positively boring about it, I'm sure, but I see absolutely part of my role talking about flexible working. That is my job, is to have those conversations. It's not for me to say, okay, here it is, I've got the guide to flexible working, you can take this and you can now make it happen in your organizations. And the reason I'm focusing on flexible working, because obviously that's my fundamental role, but if we can get flexibility right, that helps carers. So one of the things I am really proud about that makes an instant impact for a large majority of our workforce is that from September 13th last year, we have NHS terms and conditions that changed to say that everyone has a day one right to conversations about flexible working, rather than the statutory requirement, which is 26 weeks. And we know, I mean, if the NHS doesn't know how fragile and shifting and short life is, then who the heck does? So we are able to say that we know life doesn't stay the same. We know that between offering you a job and recruiting you into place, your circumstances could have changed. So we want to have that conversation right early on. And what I want to do is take that even further. And we are trying to encourage people to talk about that at the point of advert. So you don't have that awkward conversation when you're applying for a job that, when do I say that I'm a carer? When do I say I need flexibility? Do I put it in my application? Do I wait until I'm shortlisted and mention it at the interview? Or do I wait until they say they really like me, they want me for the job, and then I say, oh, by the way, Or do I hide it and try and struggle on without doing that? And we're hoping that by putting that up front and putting that into the terms and conditions, which covers about 1 million of our workforce, that really fundamentally changes things. And that thing about not needing a reason, you don't need to say why you need flexibility, that is in those terms and conditions now as well. So in terms of a big workforce, actually small shifts in policy can help around flexible working, that helps not just carers, but also anyone else who just wants a fundamental work-life balance to be able to do the school run, go to yoga, make pottery, whatever it is that you want to do in your flexible time. You know, that's how we need to land it. And that, I think, is where we have the biggest influence when we're such a tiny team making big cultural shifts in such a huge organization.
Thanks very much, Jane. Jasmine, sort of not dissimilar kind of question in terms of a large global organisation. A particular challenge for business champions, kind of raising the issue of caring across a global workforce and engaging different HR teams and other business leaders. Do you find that a challenge?
Yes, and I would say so because, you know, EMD Serono, I alluded to this before, is a healthcare business of Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany, and it's a global company. And I remember when we were rolling out our future ways of working, our head of group benefits was making recommendations to our CEO at the time. And this was incredibly complicated. And I had appreciated how each market, you know, we talk about the difference between the US and the UK, but then talk about the difference between the Middle East, South America. I just had a huge appreciation for his job. And as Jane alluded to, you know, just having to have basic tenets, you know, around what are we agreeing to here, right? Is there a core amount of days? Is there, you know, all these different elements that are just far more complicated than I've ever appreciated before. And we're having to do it in waves because we're having to have the cultural conversations with managers to make sure that they're open to this and understand, you know, why this is a pivot for our seismic company, right? And I would say overwhelmingly, people are in favor of it and understand it. And it definitely helps having our group CEO across all three businesses and just consistently signing on to this. But there has been some elements of resistance, particularly as we're figuring out cultural elements. And I'd be curious what others would say. You know, coming out of the pandemic, we all had a forced experiment with working from home. And now there's the cultural conversation, and I see a little bit of whiplash starting to happen where people are like, you know what, we're going to start demanding that people are back in the office. And then we're having to say like, well, yes, but what does that look like? And, you know, what is flexibility conversation? And it's starting to rear its head again in a way that I don't think we anticipated. And that's gotten complicated is what I would say. And just so I don't think we're the only one with this kind of dirty laundry, is we're trying to figure out how to, you know, get quote unquote the working culture back and then not lose some of the lessons learned.
And you also have to have that infrastructure around. I mean, here in the UK, our social care service isn't back up and running at the level that it was. So respite centres aren't open to enable or empower people to go back to the old style of working if you wanted, even if you wanted to, or if you were trying to be forced to. So that then in itself is forcing people to give up work to care because they don't have the support system or network around them. I'm very conscious of time. We've got about 6 minutes, so I'm going to give each of our panelists about 1.5 minutes to give me, you know, their final kind of thoughts on this subject, and maybe the single most important thing to carers being recognised and supported in the workplace. So I'll continue in the same order as I have done all along. So Caroline, you're first, which is easy, right?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, the bottom line is that carers are essential. They're essential. You know, society would collapse if we didn't have these carers. So we have to do everything possible to get the right conditions for them so that they can continue to do the right thing for their families and they can continue to play an active role in our economies. One of the things that I feel most passionate about is that we need to normalise caring. When we do that, you know, if I want to buy one of these things, there are 100 people on the high street who can tell me how to get the best one, the one that will actually work for me. When I want to find care for my mother, probably one of the most important decisions I'll ever make in my life, I'm on my own. Until we get this sorted out, you know, we are really always at peril. So for me, it's that really understanding just what happens if we don't get this right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would reflect on in particular is just, you know, the extraordinary statistics around this. You know, each of you have talked about, you know, the proportion of carers in your workplace, and whether it's, you know, one of 4 or 1 of 5, or it's extraordinarily high. It's extraordinarily high, and it means that pretty much everybody, you know, in their lives at some point will have been a carer, or will at least have known someone who is a carer. And you know, as others have said, what is so remarkable in a way is that something that is so prevalent in society is not particularly provided for. It's kind of just accepted and acknowledged, and you know, someone, I think you said, Caroline said, it's hidden in plain sight. And you know, the next phase for me, in a way, is getting beyond what we do now in terms of recognition to a point where, you know, in society, carers are fully supported and recognised. You know, there are different ways in which we can do it. You know, there's maternity and paternity leave. You know, pretty much there are as many people who are carers as there are who've, you know, given birth. Why is there not something similar for carers? So, you know, one of the things that we're doing at Carers UK is looking at making it a protected characteristic inequality legislation, which I think will be, you know, the big step towards, you know, really moving in that direction. But it should be, you know, it should be acknowledged as something that pretty much happens to everyone and is properly regulated and legislated for as a result.
Thanks, Nick. Very conscious of time now. So Jane, I'll come to you next.
My 2 top tips for anyone is do it in collaboration. So get as many people on board and behind this as you can. And the other thing is put your carers' stories front and center, because they are so powerful. The story of one individual can really shift it for others who aren't aware of the caring experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thanks. And Jasmine.
Well, many of you spoke what I was going to say. So to say something new, I would say borrow from healthy competition and just be aware of what others are doing and leading in this space, because quite often that's motivating to executive leadership.
Excellent, thank you. So just my final, just summing up before I hand back to Lauren, the things that I wrote down as the key things that I think came out of everybody: leadership and the importance of talking about caring, recognition and the fact that it takes so long for people to self-recognise as carers, and the importance of society to recognise carers, to value carers, to value them in the workplace, that you don't want to lose them, to keep them in the workplace, and culture, the importance of culture within your organisation to recognise and value them. And those were the kind of key issues that I got from everybody. So to wrap up, just a massive thank you to Caroline, to Nick, to Jane and to Jasmine, and also to the organisers today for inviting us, because it's really fantastic. Even though it's nearly my bedtime here in the UK, it's fantastic to be invited to speak at such an important conference and to share the UK's experience. So thank you very much for having us.
Well, our thanks is to you, and we know that you and your UK colleagues are up quite late to be with us, and we're so grateful that you were willing to do that and share your perspectives and insights. A very powerful conversation, so thank you. As we move along, we're going to share 2 final care stories now. And I think they're going to reflect a lot of the themes that have been part of this conversation that we just were a part of. These carer stories come from Munita in New Zealand and Zolma from the United States. So Munita's story does not include audio, and I'm going to ask that my colleague Lauren read the description of the images Munita shared with us, so that if you're listening along to us and relying on that audio, you'll be hearing my colleague Lauren's voice read Munita's story. So please enjoy those images and text descriptions that she captured and shared with us. And then right after that story, we'll share Zolma's story, which addresses her role as a paid caregiver, and I think challenges us to make room in our understandings of care for how the personal and professional can overlap, and how a fragile care economy impacts paid and unpaid caregivers in distinct and significant ways. So we'll move now right into those 2 stories.
My name is Munita, Muna, and I live in New Zealand. Me and my 5 kids are caregivers for Abdullah Imtiaz Aziz. Abdullah's dad died when I was pregnant with him. Abdullah was born with congenital heart defects and has had few surgeries. At one of our hospital stays, he suffered brain injury due to medical mishap and is now quadriplegic, GMFCS level 5. All of a sudden, huge responsibilities fell on us to take care and look after him, and Abdullah's siblings automatically became young carers. It's been difficult because we are one adult family, but we do it as a family. Paternal grandparents help as well, and tackle one day at a time. The first photo shows the huge responsibilities that fall on carers, especially the siblings, my kids, and how they feel. The second photo shows the solution, which would be subsidized or fully paid outings for families to ensure they have fun. The third photo shows Abdullah relaxing in the tub because if people around you are happy, then it flows onto you.
Este tiempo para poder hablar un poquito con ustedes sobre mi día a día, lo que es mi trabajo y un poquito de mi vida personal. Mi nombre es Zulma Inglés, tengo 48 años de edad, tengo 28 años de vivir en los Estados Unidos. Desde que vine me enfoqué en mejorar y dar lo mejor de mí. He hecho diferentes trabajos, he trabajado de limpieza, de todo un poco en la cocina, pero mi trabajo actual desde el 2007 es ser una cuidadora personal. Y como cuidadoras, pues tenemos asignaciones, lo cual hacemos con ellas diferentes cosas. Lo principal, su aseo personal, su aseo de la casa, lavar su ropa, comprar comida, hacer su comida y tratar de hacerlas independientes, porque de eso es lo que se trata. Nosotros somos cuidadoras para ellas personales, pero también tenemos que ayudarles a ellas a ser independientes, a que también ellas todavía pueden hacer sus cosas. No estoy diciendo que tienen que hacer sus cosas, no, pero para que ellas todavía se sienten útiles en la vida, porque en realidad la mayoría de personas mayores lo que pasa es eso, la frustración de ellos es que dejan de hacer sus cosas que ellos pues hacían siempre, nunca estaban acostumbrados a que alguien les hiciera sus cosas. Entonces cuando tú llegas y empiezas a hacerles todo, ellas se sienten como personas que ya no son útiles, y eso es lo que nosotros tenemos que hacer. La lucha de nosotros es decirles a ellos que todavía para nosotros significan mucho en la vida, que son nuestras enseñanzas. Pues yo nunca pudiera decir que me considero como una cuidadora personal, porque siempre para mí yo veo como que nosotros somos parte de su familia y ella para nosotros. Entonces simplemente solo necesitamos llenarlos de cariño para que el día de ellos sea más placentero. Tenemos, especialmente en este momento que estuvimos en pandemia, fuimos esenciales para ellos, esenciales en muchas cosas, porque no había familia, no había amigos, éramos solo ellas y yo. Entonces era difícil, nos volvimos psicólogos, nos volvimos, mejor dicho, de todo un poco yo. Y fue difícil para mí, muy difícil para mí, pensar que mis pacientes me estaban necesitando en ese momento y no podía estar con ellos porque tenía que cuidarme también yo. Son cosas que tú dices, Dios mío, ¿y ahora qué va a pasar si yo no llego? ¿Los van a cuidar igual que yo? Es algo muy difícil para nosotros también. Ahora bien, en otro sentido, pues a veces tú te sientes frustrado o tal vez no tomado en cuenta porque te das cuenta que haces parte de este país. Bueno, como digo, soy una mujer salvadoreña que vino desde los 20 años a este país y vine a luchar para salir adelante, pero ha sido difícil llegar y agarrar tus documentos. Hoy por hoy soy una ciudadana americana y muchas veces me siento como que no lo fuera. ¿Por qué? Porque hay muchas cosas alrededor de uno que, aunque tú te hagas ciudadano de este país, no eres tomado en cuenta como deberías. No tenemos ningún beneficio alguno con ninguna compañía. Nosotros no tenemos de decir nos vamos a ir una semana de vacaciones y tu cheque va a estar esperando. No tenemos un seguro médico que podamos cubrir por el dinero que nosotros ganamos. Y espero que tengamos esos beneficios que tanto uno anhela y busca, porque así todos estaríamos bien trabajando.
Thank you, Munita and Zelma, for those powerful images and words as they shared our stories, which brings our Global Voices of Caregiving project to a close. If you're interested in the stories you missed that we shared earlier today, or you want to revisit ones that you've seen, I just dropped the link to that project in the chat. So all of these stories are available online and you can go explore that in your own time. As we move ahead here, I'm going to bring our last live speaker on board here. Anil Patil is the founder and executive director of Carers Worldwide and is bringing our final live session here tonight, discussing economic empowerment for carers in South Asia, which is where his organization operates. Anil is going to ground us with some statistics on what carers and caregiving looks like in South Asia and why financial burden is such a critical consideration in the work that Carers Worldwide does. He'll also address some of the solutions and economic activities that promote the financial well-being of the carers served by Carers Worldwide. So welcome, Anil. Please begin.
Thank you, Lauren, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's a great honor and privilege to be part of World Carers conversation. What a fantastic day it has been, very inspiring and thought-provoking sessions. Jasmine has set a context and scene for this theme, particularly advancing economic security. She also highlighted the report which was commissioned by Embracing Carers, particularly on Global Carer Wellbeing Index, which Carers Worldwide was part of it. I just would like to share two things, how COVID has impacted lives of carers, particularly in South Asia, and this study was done in India. 55% of carers have reported due to COVID impact of COVID-19 increased in stress and anxiety. And 72% reported reduction in household income. So that sets you the scene for this next 25 to 30 minutes conversation. So today I'm going to share with you all about the work of Carers Worldwide, how we are supporting to rebuild carers' lives post-COVID. So we have prioritized two areas. One is improving the mental health and well-being of carers. Another is improving the household income for carers. Due to COVID and caring responsibility, many families are struggling with financial burden and significant reduction in the family income. So next slide, please. So when I talk about the family carers, who are they? We use a very broad definition of family carers. Carers, we mean that any individual of any age who cares or nurses a relative, friend, or a partner requiring help due to physical, mental ill health, or chronic disabilities, or any other cause. In low and middle income countries, most of the carers, almost all carers, are invisible, hidden behind the curtain. They are most isolated. They are among us, but we don't have the eyes to see them, and they are most vulnerable because there is no recognition, there is no support services for carers. Next slide, please. So just I want to draw all of your attention by highlighting the statistics on caring and the burden of caring in South Asia. As many of the speakers on today's session have highlighted, majority of the caring is done by women. It's no different in South Asia. So in a different country, different statistics is there, but currently Carers Worldwide is working in 3 countries, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And these 3 countries, majority of carers are women. 84% of carers are women. And look at the statistics. Almost 8 out of 10 carers are experiencing anxiety and depression. If there is no support system for the carers, they would become the user of mental health services. So in a way, it is better to provide the support to carers so that they can improve their health and well-being and also provide the quality care. There is no respite or a short break. Facilities or services available. And as I earlier said, that they are most socially excluded and isolated. And many of young carers, there is no education. Because of caring responsibility, they are dropping out of school to care for their siblings or parents who have been suffering from chronic illnesses or mental health issues. Next slide, please. So to continue with the financial burden of caring in South Asia, 9 out of 10 carers in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh have reported financial worries. So this is our own survey we have carried out. Almost everybody, and over 75% of carers in Bangladesh report not earning a living due to caring responsibilities. 63% carers in Nepal, and nearly 68% of carers in India, that is eastern part of India, where they earn less than 1,000 rupees per month, which is less than $15 per month. And this is a very stark statistics I'm highlighting, and that is the reality. And of course, COVID-19 has exacerbated the situation further. And I will share how we are able to rebuild their life, to not just to improve their health and well-being, but also improve their household income as well. Next slide, please. So I would like to share the broader understanding about the issues, this financial burden, why it is so significant in South Asia. Partly because there is no recognition of the critical role played by the carers, neither a state government or the national government. Of course, the things are changing slowly due to the work of carers worldwide with its partner organization. One is, like you have heard previous panelists and also previous speakers, that in the West there is a social security provision for carers is there, because the carers' contribution is recognized and their vital role is appreciated. So like in Europe and UK, there is a carers allowance is there, and the social security provision for carers is there. Whereas in the countries where we operate, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, there is no social security provision for carers. And again, earlier we had a concept of joint family and extended family 20-25 years ago. Unfortunately, it is more and more nucleus families. So the primary carers have no one to share caring responsibilities with. So they are the one continue to care for their loved one and continue to do the household chores, cleaning, cooking, washing, and everything. It's not 1 day, 1 month, or 1 year, rest of their life. So that is also, even though they have the skills and expertise, they could be engaged in a formal economy, but due to caring responsibility, they are unable to take part in that situation. As I said in my previous slide, that most of carers are women, lack of income earning opportunities for carers means that women are economically dependent on male household members, which perpetuates gender inequality. Again, one of the speakers was talking about the Sustainable Development Goal, and one of the goal is gender equality. So due to caring responsibility, there is a significant burden on women again. Just before panel session talked about how important it is to have the employees to have that flexible working opportunities. In the South Asia, lack of flexible working opportunities, which often resulting into carers who do earn a living, engaging in a precarious, low-paid, informal roles. And employers and potential employers do not offer carer-friendly employment policies. This is the thing we are planning to engage from this year onwards, but up until now, there is no such discussion or happening within the companies or corporate world. When carers and care for individuals do not work, that means there are two individuals are losing income. So they are unable to contribute to the household income. These are the earning adult, have the skills and expertise due to caring responsibility or person needing the care, those two individuals. Imagine family living below poverty line, two adults are unable to go to work. Just you can think about the situation there. Next slide, please. So who are we? Carers Worldwide was set up 10 years ago with my professional experience of working in mental health field and personal experience of being a carer myself to daughter who has Down syndrome. So these two experiences have led me to establish Carers Worldwide organization 10 years ago. and this year we are celebrating 10th anniversary. We have a very ambitious vision. We want to make sure that every carer in the world routinely supported in order to achieve their physical, emotional, economic, and social well-being. And in the mission statement, there are three critical words out there. One is carers' role to be recognized and supported. And the second one is the moment we're talking about carers doesn't mean that we're not interested in cared for individuals. How do you create that equanimity between the carer and cared for individuals? How do you create that nurturing environment within the family so that each and everybody recognizes and respects each other's role? Next slide, please. So what do we do? So this is a simple model I have come up with to provide the support to carers. We act as a catalyst to provide the support to carers through these 5 elements of the model through our partner organizations. And we collect the evidence, then we engage the policymakers to bring the systemic changes in the countries where we are working. So these 5 elements are, one is we have promoted carers only exclusively emotional support groups to reduce their loneliness and isolation and have an opportunity to meet with other carers in a similar situation. So to address their health and well-being issues, we work through primary healthcare centers and train several hundred barefoot counselors and also frontline health workers to recognize and identify the carers and start asking a simple question: how are you? Do you need any help? That will go a long way, and we were able to bring significant attitudinal changes and change in their behavior and practice in primary healthcare centers. Through our innovative approaches, we are able to offer short break and respite care by promoting community caring centers. So 5 to 6 hours, carers can bring their loved one or a child with a disability or person with mental illness to the center, where 2 adult carers are caring for their loved one, providing the nurturing environment and support so that they can either attend their socio-cultural activities or go to work, earn an income, or go to market to sell their product or buy groceries or vegetables they need for household consumption. So today I'm going to focus on that employment, training, and education, how we are able to upskill carers and engage them in a productive work and earn an income along with the caring responsibility. Of course, all of this will enable us to engage policymakers and advocate for carers' rights and carers' needs, particularly supporting carers with additional income so that they can lead a meaningful life. So this is a simple, cost-effective, scalable model I have come up with, and it has been quite a transformational. I started with just 250 carers 10 years ago. Today, we have transformed the lives of more than 120,000 carers in just 10 years, working through partner organizations in 3 countries. Next slide, please. So what we do, these are the economic activities. As I said, we have promoted carers groups. There are more than 630 carers groups we have promoted, and there are 2 exclusive carers cooperative. Those are first of its kind in South Asia. So these groups are not only help carers to reduce their loneliness and isolation and able to connect with other carers in similar situation, but slowly, once their mental health and improved, we started discussion with the carers about what are their skills, what are their expertise, what is the demand locally, would they like to either go back to their work, previous work, or do they have an idea how we could engage them in a productive work along with the caring responsibility, and by providing a little bit of financial support so that they can start in livelihood opportunities. The second one is, as I mentioned, we have promoted, there are 24 community caring center that has made a huge difference. Children with disabilities were able to receive much needed enrichment support, and that enabled carers to go to formal employment or again earning an income by setting up a small enterprise within household or engaged in agriculture activities like vegetable growing. So it is a free time for them to earn a living. And then third one is promoting fairer distribution of caring responsibilities among family members so that primary carers have time to earn a living. As I said, more and more nucleus families, but for us, whole family as a unit, even if it is a family of 4 or 5 members, it is important other members also recognize the primary carer and can they share the little bit of caring responsibility so that primary carer has time for herself or himself and also engage in a livelihood or income generation activities. Then the fourth activity is advocating government for social security pension for carers. In India, we are able to influence the policies, particularly Rights of Persons with Disability Act, as well as Mental Health Bill Act. Those two acts recognizes the support to caregivers. And final point is supporting carers in accessing existing entitlements for themselves, those they care for, or other household members. For example, if they're caring for a person with disabilities, whether they are able to access the disability pension or that individual had a certificate, all those things, whatever they are entitled to receive the government support. So we facilitate through our partner organization. Next slide, please. So to continue with our economic activities, we provided each group small revolving funds, maybe around $500 for each group. And within a group, there are 12 to 15 members are there. And initially, like 5 members took that initial loan and they set up a small enterprise, started earning an income, then they repay back to the group. Then another 5 members will access that loan. So this has enabled us to improve the financial situation of almost 80% of carers with whom we are working, which I will share in a minute. And as I said, advocating government in India to recognize caring as an employment under Employment Guarantee Scheme. This is a National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Under that, there are 26 trades they have recognized and the skills they have recognized. So we are advocating, why don't they consider high dependency care itself is a job, and can they give 150 days wage to the carer? And we have been hugely successful advocating at the local level. And of course, we are also encouraging employers to adopt carer-friendly working policies and practices, and encouraging various microfinance institutions to offer financial products to carers and their families, and providing skills training and financial literacy training to carers, and facilitating access to young carer education for child carers or young carers so that they can enter employment once they become adults. Next slide, please. So this is our impact I was sharing. When we started, only 30% of carers had a kind of some sort of income. So today, 80% of carers are now earning a living, and contributing to lifting their families out of poverty. And as I said, more than 630 groups have been promoted, and 2 exclusive carers cooperatives are there. So nearly 70,000 pound, equivalent of pound, has been saved in the group savings, because carers are earning an income. They want to save 100 rupees, 200 rupees. So during an emergency, they can borrow money and use that money for health services, medicine costs, or education, or school fees, and all those things. So almost nearly 860,000 equivalent of pound, we have accessed the government support in these 3 countries. Next slide, please. So just quickly, I want to give a success story, 2 success story about how this group livelihood activity works. So Chinta Devi from rural North India, she was caring for her husband who was suffering from schizophrenia, mental illness, severe mental illness. And earlier, before she came onto our program, she used to borrow money just to purchase medicine and consultation and all. Then she was part of the local carers group, and she took some loan from carers group and set up a small shop, and started along with that selling snacks as well in the evening, like pakoras and bhajis, onion bhajis. Today she earns around 600 to 800 rupees per day, which is almost more than $10 per day, which is a healthy income for her, makes her family financially stable. Next slide, please. Another story. This is in the eastern part of India. This is a group in Odisha state, and they participated in 3 days livelihood workshop. And soon after, the group started a jackfruit chips production enterprise. The group accepted a startup loan to purchase utensils and raw materials. And today they produce 10 to 15 kgs of chips, very healthy alternative chips to potatoes per day. So now they are receiving a huge order from a big supermarket. So we have linked up with the marketing agencies as well. So these are small, locally driven income generation activities, not only improving their household income, but also contributing to the economy as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of advocacy and social security, I would like to share our success story that Carers Worldwide is the only organization till today trying to highlight the issue of carers and working at a strategic level in low and middle income countries. And one of India's big state in South India, government of Karnataka has recognized us and as a domain expert by Karnataka State Legal Services Authority. So earlier I mentioned that in 2016 Act, we have made a strong case for support, and they have recognized, and carers allowance are being provided to the carers, particularly in Karnataka State. And now we are also, due to lack of statistics, we don't know how many carers are there. So we are advocating part of Disability Act 2016, carers question to be included in the upcoming census in Karnataka to identify the scale of caring that could result in more carers accessing carers allowance in district. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for inviting and giving me an opportunity to share the Carers Worldwide work with family carers in low and middle income countries. And there is a lot of information on our website and on social media. Please do sign up to our monthly e-news as well if you would like to know more about us and keep you updated. Once again, thank you so much, Lauren.
Anil, thank you for your presentation. And I want to invite the audience now, if you have a question for Anil, we have a minute or two here to take a question or two from the audience. So please go ahead and put your questions into the chat box, and you can also put them in that Q&A area. But I wanted to ask you, Anil, you know, maybe to get us started here as questions come in, about something that stands out for me in the work that you do, which is you're really sort of focusing both on promoting support for caregivers while also working sort of to inspire systemic change. And I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about why that advocacy is so important to the work that you do.
Thank you for that question, Lauren. We are such a small organization, we cannot change everywhere. So what we can do is we can share our best practices and evidence. Ultimately, it is the government which should recognize the critical role played by the carers. And with the evidence, we are able to engage policymakers, decision makers, as well as other service providers. And like in the previous one of the panelists talked about, the collaboration is key here. So we are collaborating with various stakeholders, whether it is academics, service providers, corporates, as well as government agencies. So ultimately, it is the government responsibility to recognize the critical role carers are playing. Because of that caring role, they are unable to take part in formal economy, contribute to the society income and their own household income. So it is so crucial.
Thank you for sharing some more about that. We had one question that came in from the audience, and I'll read that to you now. And I think due to time, that might be where we have to leave things this afternoon. And this question comes from Allison. Allison is asking if you have any plans, your organization, to expand outside of South Asia, possibly in continental Africa or Southeast Asia or South America.
Thank you, Alison, for asking that question. Yes, we do have in the next coming 10 years plan to expand to Africa as well as in other continents. But more than that, if anybody interested to know more about our work, I would welcome to visit one of our countries, and you can learn how the model is being implemented, how we are working through partner organization, kinds of challenges we faced and kinds of success we have achieved collectively. So would be more than happy to share. But short answer is yes, we do have a plans to expand our work into Africa.
Thanks for that question, Allison, and thank you, Anil, for answering it. So we're going to leave it there now. I want to thank you again for your presentation and sharing your perspectives with us. And the best place to find out more information is the website you just saw on Anil's last slide. And we've also dropped that into the chat box, so you can click on that there and find out a little more about CARES Worldwide. Thanks so much, Anil.
Thank you, Laura.
So as we move to our final session, we also have a final decision point where attendees have a choice to make about the next session that you attend. So if you stay right where you are here on Zoom, you're going to hear a session next from Elizabeth Hansen, a professor, and Joanna Vicent, a PhD candidate, both from the Department of Health and Caring Sciences at Linnaeus University in Sweden. Professor Hansen and Ms. Vicent will be sharing insights from their research on how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted working carers in Sweden. Now, if you've joined us here on Zoom, you'll have a choice to attend an alternative session at the same time. This one is from Dr. Sherry Porter, Associate Professor at Clarkson College in Nebraska in the United States. Dr. Porter is going to address carers in higher education and how this specific population needs supports in the academic settings that they're navigating. So as we're thinking through how to fortify the economic tools and well-being of caregivers today, I'm so glad to be able to share Dr. Porter insights on this topic, which translates in many ways to real financial well-being of caregivers before they're even in the workforce or in certain career pipelines in these academic and higher education settings. So if you're on Zoom and you'd like to hear Professor Hansen and Joanna Vicent on their recent research concerning worker caregivers and COVID-19, you can hang tight. We're going to hear that session in a moment. But if you're with us and interested in more information from Dr. Porter on carers in higher education, watch that chat box for a link to leave this meeting and catch that session. If you do leave us, don't forget to use your Zoom meeting information and rejoin me here right after. And no matter which session you attend, the links to the others you miss will remain available to you for your viewing at another time. And we're also going to provide this entire recording and all of our bonus sessions to attendees in the upcoming weeks so that you won't miss a minute. So now we're going to hear that session from Elizabeth Hansen and Joanna Vicent, working carers situation with regards to their health, support, gendered patterns of care, and impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the case of Sweden. So while my colleague Lauren sets that up for us, I'm going to head to the chat and share that link to Dr. Porter's session.
Hello and welcome to this session named Working Care Situation with regards to their health, support, gender patterns of care, and impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the case of Sweden. My name is Joanna Vicent and I am a PhD student at Linnaeus University in Sweden. And my main supervisor is Professor Elizabeth Hansen, also from Linnaeus University and the Swedish Family Care Competence Center. Here is an outline of the points we will go through today, and the main idea is to present part of my doctoral thesis, which focus is to understand the way working carers in Sweden feel about their care provision and their work. I will start by defining working carers and give an explanation to why we need to know more about this particular group of carers, both in Europe and in Sweden. I will then present the Swedish context by describing how informal care is organized. And after that, I will move to focus on the results of a recent study and describe the current profile of working carers in Sweden and their situation with regards to health, support, and gendered patterns of care. I will proceed with very recent results on an ongoing study on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and on this particular group of carers. And the presentation will end with a short reflection on what the future holds and how the knowledge gained from these studies can be used in the present and future to improve the situation of working carers in Sweden. So let's start from the beginning. Why working carers? The natural question here is, who are working carers? Let's say that if you help your parents with grocery shopping after work once a week, or if you care for a disabled child outside working hours, then you are a working carer. A formal definition of working carers is a family member or other unpaid individual who is in paid employment and at the same time provides a range of different help, support, and care activities on a regular basis to a sick, frail, and disabled relative or significant other. And being a working carer is more common than we think, since 51% of individuals in the European Union between 18 and 65 years old are informal carers, and many are working carers. In Sweden, informal carers comprise more than 1.3 million people, and working carers are estimated to be around 900,000 people. Working carers face a so-called triple penalty in terms of poor mental health and well-being, risk of social exclusion, and even poverty. This means that combining informal care with employment represents consequences to working carers, who face higher risk of physical and mental health problems, social isolation, and negative effects on their employment and career opportunities. But to provide informal care is not only negative. Many carers experience meaningfulness and beneficial effects when providing care. It is also known that gender differences exist when providing informal care, with women taking on higher number of care hours and more often experiencing negative outcomes of informal care when compared to men. A very short introduction of Sweden. Sweden is a Nordic country in Northern Europe with a population of 10.4 million people, the largest of the Nordic countries. It is one of Europe's biggest countries in size and includes forests, mountains, and lakes. And today Sweden is one of the 10 highest rated countries when considering access to education, life expectancy, and life standard. But why do I focus my doctoral studies on this particular group of carers in this particular country? We already know that Sweden informal carers comprise more than 1.3 million people, and working carers are estimated to be 900,000 people. So we do know that they exist, and we do have an approximate number of how many working carers there are in Sweden. However, we lack information on the type of support they answer for, the extension of informal care they provide, and what kind of support they receive as carers. Further, we need to know the outcomes of informal care in this particular group, both the positive and the negative outcomes. And we need to gather information on the outcomes on carers' life and employment. Based on previous knowledge, we know that gender differences exist, so we also need to know whether or not there are gender differences in the working carers' informal care provision. And building on preliminary findings of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Swedish informal carers in general, that shows that carers had to provide more hours of care with less support during this pandemic period, it is interesting to know how working carers experienced care provision during the pandemic. In order to answer to these questions, we need to first give an introduction of the informal care policy context and practice in Sweden. Public expenditure on long-term care ranks among the top 3 in Europe at 3.5% of the gross domestic product GDP. Long-term care services in Sweden are organized at the local level. Well, municipalities can purchase service from both public and private providers, and where long-term care providers can choose from several care providers. But even if the long-term care model for frail, older, and or disabled people in Sweden is still highly regarded internationally compared to other EU member states, demographic aging trends and economic cutbacks in the municipalities have led to a significant reduction in the number of nursing homes available during the course of the last few decades. In terms of the legal recognition of informal carers in Sweden, an amendment of the Swedish Social Services Act in 2009 stipulated for the first time that municipalities are obliged to offer support to carers, who are now legally entitled to have an assessment of their own needs as carers. A national care strategy in Sweden is being developed to stimulate more comprehensive policies and support for carers. Sweden is also an early adopter of gender-neutral policies with high levels of female workforce participation, with one of the highest female employment rates in OECD of 70.7%. But even if Sweden has a stated policy goal that all women and men, regardless of their social or ethnic background, shall have the same access to public support, working carers' employment-related rights remain limited. So I will now move forward to present the results of a study included in my doctoral work, and that has been recently published. This study used the results of a cross-sectional questionnaire-based survey performed during 2018 by the Swedish Family Care Competence Center and Statistics Sweden, using a stratified random sample of the Swedish population aged 18 years old or over. This questionnaire addressed the type and extent of informal care provided, the support received, and the impact of care provision on employment. The data collection was done like this. Statistics Sweden selected 30,000 adults living in Sweden and sent the questionnaire by post. Of those, 11,168 participants returned the questionnaire, turning a response rate of 37.3%. That is, 37.3% of those who received the questionnaire answered it and sent it back. Participants aged 18 to 65 years old were a total of 6,432, which is a bit more than half of those who answered the questionnaire, that is 57.6%. Of those, 1,093 were informal carers, and of those, 818 were either employed or self-employed. These numbers allow us to estimate that around 77.4% of the Swedish population in 2018 were working carers, which is an estimated of 602,926 people. The main findings of this study showed that the middle age of working carers was 48.6 years old, and more than half were women. 6.4% of women were self-employed compared to 20.7% of men. Most working carers cared for a person they did not live with, and the majority cared for their parents. However, 2 out of 8 working carers cared for their own child. Most working carers cared at least once a week, but 2 out of 5 working carers provided care on a daily basis. And for most working carers, time spent with informal care was between 1 to 10 hours a week, but for 1 out of 9 working carers, they provided more than 130 hours of informal care per week. More than half of working carers cared with help of others, and working carers provided help, care, and support with various types of activities such as supervision, personal care, financial support, medication, and even practical activities. So a typical Swedish working carer was a middle-aged female providing weekly or daily care to a non-cohabitant parent who experienced care as sometimes demanding and received no formal support as carer. Only 1 out of 5 working carers had been offered or received carer support in the form of information and advice. And even if many working carers did not receive support as carers, they were interested in support in the form of economic support, information and advice, and health checkups. Female working carers were more likely than males to care alone and with higher intensity, to report the need for help in meeting the care recipient's needs, and to experience care as demanding. A Approximately 17% of the working carers reported their employment had been affected due to care responsibilities. Female working carers' ability to work was affected more than males, and they were more commonly prevented from applying to a new job. More than 3 out of 10 experienced that their ability to pursue a career or studies had been affected. But how was it affected? Well, 5.4% of working carers had to quit their work due to informal care responsibilities. 7 out of 9 working carers experienced that they did not have time to their careers or studies, and most of them were male carers. 2.7% could only engage in temporary work. 5% was unable to apply to a new job, and most of them were female. And 1 out of 9 working carers experienced that their work was affected in any other way. From a gender perspective, we can see that Swedish female working carers, compared to males, provided more hours of informal care across more care domains, especially medication and personal care. They provided care more often alone and less often had received support as carers. And this places female working carers in Sweden in a challenging situation when combining paid work and care. So greater recognition of the challenges faced by working carers is required in Sweden and other countries, as are policies to reduce gender inequalities in informal care provision for this particular group of carers. But were these results surprising for the Swedish context? When recognizing informal care, the amendment of the 2009 Social Services Act established that municipalities were obliged to offer support to carers who were entitled to an assessment of their needs as carers. So the finding that only 20% of working carers had been offered or received support in form of information and advice was considered low, taking the 2009 amendment into consideration. Further, Sweden is an early adopter of gender-neutral policies with high levels of female workforce participation. However, our studies showed that female compared to male working carers in Sweden provide care more often, more intensively, more often alone, and find it more demanding, placing them in a more challenging situation compared to their male counterparts when attempting to combine paid work and care. The negative outcomes of informal care on employment experienced by female working carers also put women at risk of a difficult economic situation when they reach pension age. Moving on to two other studies included in my doctoral work that is still ongoing. This interview study focuses on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on working carers' life and employment. And this study is based on semi-structured interviews with Swedish working carers who have experienced the combination of care provision with employment both prior and during the COVID-19 pandemic. To be able to participate in the study, participants have to be aged between 18 and 64 years old. They have to have experience of combining work and informal care both prior and during the pandemic, and they need to be either employed or self-employed. So far, we have interviewed mainly women, and we face some difficulties when recruiting male working carers for this study. The interviews focus on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemics on working carers' care provision, support, and employment. But we also gather in working carers' recommendation for change in policy and services in the future. A very short note on our preliminary results. They show that working carers have a difficult time to find time to participate in the study. We have done interviews with working carers who were doing housework or training at the same time as they were answering the questions. Working from home led to both positive and negative experiences during the pandemic, sometimes raising the stress levels and sometimes leading to a better family union. Working carers seem to be invisible, both before and during the pandemic, and society does not know about or focus on them. The pandemic seems to raise both negative and positive experiences for working carers and seems to be a motor to their expression of feelings related to their care provision. Working carers reflect on the lack of support, both as carers and as employers, and good experiences at the workplace during the pandemic are related to comprehensive and understanding chiefs and colleagues. So we can hope that the results of the studies included in my doctoral work will be used to generate policy and changes that lead to harmony in the work-care dilemma. Working carers' need for support has to be considered, and technologies may be a way to deliver that support. Gender differences that show that female carers are still lacking behind their male counterparts need to be taken into consideration when generating new policies and changes in society. The value and impact of informal care provided by working carers needs and must be recognized and talked about in order to make these carers visible in society. And finally, the impact of major societal changes, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, that shows working carers' resilience, need to be understood to deliver better support and understanding in future pandemics. We should never forget that working carers may have several roles: carer, employer, friend, neighbor, but they are most of all people. And that is why they care and why we need to care for them. As a doctoral student, I was part of the Sustainable Care Program funded by the English Social Research Council and led by Professor Sue Yandel from the University of Sheffield. The contact person for the program in Sweden is Professor Elisabeth Hansen, my main supervisor from Linnaeus University and NCOA. My doctoral studies were financed by Linnaeus University, Skandia, and the Swedish Family Care Competence Center. And I would like to thank you for allowing me to share this presentation with you, and do not hesitate to contact us if you would like to know more about working carers and informal care in the Swedish context. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna and Elizabeth, for that session. In our final few minutes together, I'm going to share information on how we can stay in touch, as well as a few parting words. I want to take a moment to express my sincere thanks to today's speakers, to our event sponsor, EMD Serono, and to the caregivers who made Global Voices of Caregiving possible through their generous storytelling. I also want to recognize our audience for their engagement and ideas throughout the day, and for your stories on Twitter and Facebook. It's our privilege at the National Alliance for Caregiving to host this event. I hope that whether you joined us throughout the day or just for one segment, that the following themes came through to you in the carer stories shared and throughout our sessions. The first is inclusion, widening our programs and definitions, even our language, to include family caregivers better, to open our minds to recognize and promote awareness for the full diversity of caregivers that exist, whether they're siblings, youth and young caregivers, multi-generational carers, long-distance caregivers, and multi and transcultural caregivers. We also heard echoed throughout the program the value of listening and centering caregivers in the work that we do, and the storytelling that was part of today, and in the calls to include caregivers in the design and development and evaluation of programs and policies that impact them. And finally, the value of collaboration, the whole reason for us being together today. If you take away one thing from your participation, I hope it's that you're not doing this work alone, that you have peers and colleagues near and far who are working through the same issues and who have data and practices and other strengths to lend to you, and that today sparks deeper conversations and sustained connections in the upcoming weeks and months. Collaboration is something that's really core to what we do at the National Alliance for Caregiving. And as we close, I'll share a few ways that we can stay in touch. Immediately following this webinar, Zoom attendees are going to see a pop-up window with a short 6-question survey. This is our invitation to you to tell us how we did today. The final question of our survey gives you the option to submit your email to NAC's weekly e-newsletter, This Week in Caregiving, to stay connected with the National Alliance for Caregiving's work and our wider network. But if you're not on Zoom, you can still do this by visiting our website, which is caregiving.org. And finally, we'll be connecting back with you in the upcoming weeks via email and through our Facebook page to share the resources, including the slides and recording from today, with you so that you can revisit these sessions and engage again with the topics on your own time. So this brings our webinar to its conclusion. Thank you for your engagement. From me and the National Alliance for Caregiving team, take good care.